This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Lifeboat Addiction Recovery Cast. This is a Monday cast, which means we are going to be talking about the science of addiction. Today, we're going to be doing motivational interviewing. So, Hunter, how you doing, man?
I am doing pretty well, man. The week is coming to a beginning, I guess.
It's Wednesday when we're recording this, so it's like,
yeah,
okay.
It's like we're halfway there.
Hump day? Question mark?
So it's, I don't know. It's going good, man. I don't have too many complaints, just trucking on through, you know what I'm saying? We kind of talked about it. We'll continue to talk about it, I'm sure, but just kind of that, keep on pushing sort of thing, get through it, get through it, man.
Swimming, keep on swimming. Yeah, man, I 100% agree, and I think today's an interesting subject, motivational interviewing. Both of us, we do this all the time. We do it on a daily basis. We do it with each other. This is, I would dare say, one of the most, if not the most lethal weapon or a lethal tool in the utility belt for a recovery coach and for a recovery in general, because motivational interviewing, it's the art of holding up the living mirror. It's the art of being able to have a intimate and intricate discussion and sort out fact from fiction, sort out what an individual needs, and be able to target something. So, Hunter, what's your experience with motivational interviewing?
I would say my favorite part about motivational interviewing is you're getting an answer, but you're getting it from the individual, and you're getting in a very open-ended context. So I find when we ask targeted questions, we get targeted answers. So if I'm like, Christian, have you ever done this? Or yes. When's the last time you did this? Or what do you think about
last
this?
week?
Yeah. It's like you get a very targeted answer. To where when we motivational interview, it's like, so explain to me what's going on with this. It's like we're giving room to get the whole answer from somebody. And that's probably my favorite part about motivational interviewing is like, it's no longer me controlling the conversation. It's me pointing the conversation in a direction in which we need it to go for our job, but allowing the person to give their own answers to that question, like their own story, what's actually going on, what they actually need. And I mean, it makes them feel heard. It makes us get the answers, it's a beautiful thing.
So. Well, and I think you just pointed out the underline, it's the most impactful and most difficult part of motivational interviewing. And it's the secret art of being able to have a conversation with having loose targets in mind, but not necessarily needing a target to be hit. And that is so difficult in our field, because I think a lot of times, I know for me, especially, when I'm not motivationally interviewing somebody and I'm just having a conversation with them, ultimately there's like a list of things that I need from the individual. There's a list of like, we're pointing you into the direction of a recovery housing. We're pointing you into the direction of making the right choice. When we do motivational interviewing, that's not going to necessarily be the case. We're kind of opening a door up and just saying like, let's walk through it and explore what our possibilities are versus a regular conversation, which is, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. I'm hearing this. These are requirements. And I would say, at least with motivational interviewing, it's much more impactful for you to be able to have that, discover what you and the recovery are going to do with each other than it is for you to tell them what you're going to do with them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I yes and no. Because like when I meet with a client, like, of course I'm going to say, this is what I do.
Oh, sure.
So that's the only time that kind of popped up. Like I kind of make it clear. I try to during the first meeting with somebody of like, these are the things that I can help you with. These are the sort of, not what I can help you with, but like, these are the parameters of my job. So it lays down that framework. So we don't have to go over that as much later on. It kind of gives an idea. So there's not something brought to me or something that the person put off thinking, oh, well, I'm meeting with Hunter on Friday and he can help me with this.
Yes.
So I guess that's the only point where I'll say like, this is what we're going to work on, is basically I'm more say like, these are the things that I will actually do with you. And then when we look at like sitting down with somebody, I mean, I can't sit there and I guess Sometimes I sit with somebody, and usually like first appointment with somebody, and this is probably just my personal style. I'm like, do you got a doctor? Do you got a dentist? Do you need glasses? Pretty poignant. Like,
Well, and I think ultimately that's like the recovery coaching hack
Right.
is we have figured out generally there's a couple of things that, ultimately, and I don't want to speak in broad terms. I do want to speak a little bit more directly. We have found that individuals who are in need of our help specifically are usually in an area where they have been trying for a while to get things going and they can't. And when you sit down with somebody and in the midst of one session, you're able to get what they've been trying to get down for 2 months. You blow their minds. And I think a lot of that does come from like, okay, do you have insurance? No, we're signing up for insurance,
right.
Because it's necessary for us to do the next 30 steps down the line. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, dentist, eye doctor, getting your medication, getting all this type of stuff. So I think that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
Versus like they come to you and be like, I see you as an optometrist. Let's go ahead and get you into medical school. Like, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to get that going. Same thing with, I think you need to go to treatment.
Right.
A lot of times we think that, but it's like, we can't really force that upon the individual.
Right. And there's conversations to be had. And I mean, motivational interviewing, I think, is a lot more powerful because like the bottom line is we can see somebody and think, man, you need to go to treatment. Like you're homeless, treatment provides housing. You're struggling with an addiction, treatment will provide you with a safe place to start working through that and get a little bit of time under your belt. You're lacking structure, treatment will help you get those. So we see those things and we're like, man, that really would be what's beneficial. But me sitting there, and if I was to look at a client that I think needs treatment and say, you need to go to treatment, he's heard that a million times. There's no reception there. But if I look at an individual and I motivationally interview him and just ask him some questions, like you said, are kind of in a pointed direction loosely, and we're heading there. It's like, that is a much more powerful tool for getting someone to see the change that needs to happen within themselves than me telling them.
Yes. And I couldn't agree more. So with that being said, let's jump into motivational interviewing, because
so what I'm hearing you say is, no, I'm
yeah. So what I think you're saying is, so we talk often and we teach on this in Recovery Coach Academy, which we got one coming up in March. We got more coming up, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But we teach recovery coaches, okay, this is invaluable arrow in your quiver, but there are some things that you need to learn about the different parts of motivational interviewing. So there's things like expressing empathy, developing discrepancy, avoiding arguments, supporting self-efficacy, and rolling with resistance. Now, these are all inside of CCAR's recovery coach training. So we're going to speak a little bit more broadly on them, because if you want to know more about them, there's tons and tons of literature that you can read out there. Or just come to class, come to a Recovery Coach Academy, come and see what it's all about. See what is changing the very fabric of recovery in this nation. So let's talk a little bit about expressing empathy. So expressing empathy. So this is a big one. So when we're talking about empathy, we're not necessarily, oftentimes empathy is misconstrued with, I would say, relationship, or immediately we say empathy and therefore we understand. And that's not the case. A lot of times when we're talking about empathy, we're just understanding where their emotional state is coming from. We don't understand necessarily what they're going through. We don't understand the trauma they may have experienced, but instead, like, I've been angry too before. So I can understand being angry and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think there's a very critical point there where we're talking about, I feel like this needs touched on. So like, not saying I understand what you're going through, not saying like I get it, and I'm like, I've been through something similar, because quite frankly, none of us have been through the same thing. We've been through similar situations maybe, but it's not our place to be like, oh, I've been through that, I understand what you're going through right now, because we probably don't. It hits differently with other people. So with that, I feel like it's extremely important when we're talking about empathy, when we're talking about motivational interviewing, that we just need to treat the person with the respect and understand what they're saying to us. That's, I mean, probably the biggest thing is like, I respect you as a human being. I respect what you're going through. I respect you as an adult. There's a level of respect that's there. We're not going to say those things. We're just going to treat them in that manner. And then we're just going to understand where they're coming from. We're going to understand what they're going through. Understanding and knowing is kind of two different things, Yeah.
And when we're expressing empathy for an individual, this can be really dangerous sometimes, because we can express too much empathy and we can make them feel like we are trying to one up them. This can happen a lot of times in early recovery coaches. They feel and no matter how often we tell them this, they come into it like, I'm going to be paid to save the world by the power of my testimony.
Mm-hmm.
So they hear somebody going through something, like, oh, I know what you're going through because insert story here about trauma. And it's like, that's not what we're talking about. We're simply talking about, you're identifying the emotion inside of the individual, and you're saying, okay, do you want to unpack that emotion? Do you feel comfortable with unpacking that emotion and why you feel like that? Or do we want to keep on moving on?
Right. And I feel like there's an important fracture too, because like you said, when we think of empathy, we think of relationships. So like when I hear empathy, I think about like being empathetic with my friends. Like if my friend was going through something, it would be a lot of different I know it would, it probably would, not probably, but I know it would. I would have a conversation that would be far different than what I would have with the recovery. So having that severing line a little bit of understanding, like, you know, this person from your job field, the empathy you're expressing is in a very professional manner, and walking it out that way. You know, you're not telling them about the trauma that you had that was close to theirs. You're not doing anything like that. You're expressing, like you said, we understand, we're not judging you. We've been through it, or not that we've been through it. Sorry, misspoke there. I understand you. I'm not judging you. Like, do we want to talk about this?
Yeah. And I would say when looking to empathize with an individual, you always have to keep in mind that the person in front of you, like this is a unique individual. They've gone through their own experiences, but you always want to look at nonverbal cues. You want to be looking at things that, like, maybe that they're sharing with you that is not necessarily spoken. They're getting uncomfortable. They're shifting in their seat. They're not wanting to make eye contact. You know, they're kind of stammering a little bit, trying to get out what's going on with them. Those are all data points that need to be taken into consideration when working with an individual, because you have to realize, like, this person might be bearing their soul to you, and that might not necessarily be where your job is at that point. But how do you take them on? And one of the things that we like to do is recapping. Recapping is the art of breaking up into maybe 5 or 10 different segments. So you're having a conversation with an individual that lasts an hour. In the midst of that time, it should go as follows. They are talking 75% about things that are going on with him, and 25% of the time you are commenting on those things. You really shouldn't be bringing your whole self into it and telling them, I completely understand, man. I went through the same thing. This is what's going on. You really shouldn't be doing that. But inside of that, you want to take every few minutes, you want to kind of pause and just say, like, okay, just recap, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding where you're coming from. This is what happened, and this is what happened. This is how you made it feel, but this is now where we're at here.
Right.
And in doing that, you're not only showing that you're listening, you're not only showing that you're expressing empathy, but you're clarifying. You're clarifying for yourself. Am I hearing them correctly? Because if you're not hearing somebody correctly, which we've had happen a couple of times, and I can tell you from personal experience, if you're not hearing somebody correctly, you will not be able to get done for them what they need to get done.
Right.
You'll refer them to someplace that they didn't really need to be referred to. You'll give them a phone number for a resource that they aren't going to do anything with. It's a nightmare.
Right. And I mean, that's, I guess, comes in really big with motivational interviewing, is not only we need to listen, right? We need to actually actively listen to the person. We need to really pay attention, and then cap it back, like you're saying, because it just gives such a chance for, like, correction of misinformation. Because I mean, it can be really easy, and it could be you're not listening correctly, or they may not have communicated it clearly. There's really two sides of that coin. So I've had it where recoveries have told me this, that, and the other about the primary care physician. And then I'm thinking that I need to sign them up with the primary care physician. But the part I missed is that they just need to call their old primary care physician and get an appointment set up. So right there, I'm going to provide a resource that's not applicable to what they're going through. So it's kind of like, we really just need to be really tuned in and make sure we're getting this right. Make sure we're hearing what they're saying, and make sure we're making sure that they're communicating clearly. Because when we cap back and say, so what I'm hearing you say is, we need to get you lined up with the new primary care physician because this, that, and the other thing. And they can be like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I need you to find the number for my old primary care physician that I've been going to.
Yes, absolutely. So the next part of this is talking about, like, developing discrepancy. And this can be a very difficult portion of the discussion, because oftentimes when a recovery is talking to you, the longer that they talk, the more likely discrepancies will come up inside of their story. You need to be very cautious on how you present these, and you need to be very cautious for yourself on how you're hearing these. So a recovery that's talking to me about some of the things that are going on with them, and they're talking about, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, there might not be a lot of discrepancy that shows up. But a guy that's going to talk to me nonstop for 45 minutes which I've had my fair share of, and I can barely get a word in edgewise. They talk for like 45 minutes and it's, their ears are kind of shut off and they just stream of consciousness. They're going through things and going around in loops and all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden you realize something that they're telling you at minute 25 is contradicting something that they told you at minute 2. And something that they told you at minute 45 is contradicting X, Y, and Z. So those are things that you need to bring up. You need to say like, okay, whoa, let's pause down, right? You're saying this, but you've also said this, and you've also said this. How do those 3 things coalesce with each other? How I don't understand how these 3 things are happening. But at the same time, you want to help them identify things in their life where it's a great tool for contemplation. It's a great tool for somebody who is in this place of like, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this or not. When you're saying stuff like, hey, you want to get your kids back, but you keep on using, show me or tell me, how do these 2 things match up with each other? How do you walk these both out at the same time?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think you pretty much covered all the bases on the discrepancy piece. It's noticing not only when someone's kind of being dishonest with you, but it's also noticing when someone's being dishonest with themselves. It's a very useful tool for both, because I mean, I've heard it time and time again. Like, I want to get clean, but this, that, the other thing, I'm still living with my boyfriend who uses, or something like that. And it's like, those 2 things don't really add up to me, like those 2 things really don't walk that out too much. So it's kind of a matter of being able to, I mean, it's a really powerful tool, because it really does make the person look and say, man, maybe my actions don't line up with what I'm saying. And if I really want what I'm saying, then I probably need to change some of these actions.
Yeah. And I will say this, seldom do we see individuals who I think that they're lying to me off the get. Seldom do I ever see an individual where I don't think that they are lying to themselves off the get.
Right.
I most of the early recoveries that I'm meeting, it's almost an automatic assumption me walking in. Not that you're lying to me, you're lying to yourself about something. And that's not to say like I'm choosing their pathway or they need to do this. Not at all. They get to choose their own pathway. Let's figure it out. Let's sort how it's going to be. Now there's some that I believe are better than others, but multiple pathways model.
Right.
But ultimately, I believe a lot of the time when somebody's sitting in front of me and they've been using for a while, there is a lie that strands from in themselves. They've told themselves a lie continually. And here's the thing. It may just be negative for them. It might be them saying, I'm no good. I'm not worth it. I can't change. Addiction is something that is going to always grip my life. Those are all lies to an individual. That's lying to themselves.
Right.
We know that they can change, and we have to often be that voice that's saying to them, that external voice saying, no, you can change. You can change. You can change. You can change. But it's difficult sometimes. I will say that.
Right. I've definitely ran into that, especially with like the homeless community that struggles with substance use disorders, because I feel like life is at such a low point and it's been there for long enough. I've had people tell me like, there's no hope for me. I'm the worst drunk in Lansing, or something like that. And it's like,
there's a lot of people who get drunk in Lansing.
Right. I'm like, that's a high bar. No, but I basically had that conversation. Like, no, you're a person who's struggling with a substance use disorder. It's like you're just struggling right now. You're not a terrible person. You're not a moral defect. It's like we kind of have to reverse those things. I will say that it's hard for me to say, like, very rarely do I have a client lie to me, and it is true. It's like it is pretty rare that it happens. Usually, if someone's lying to me, it's usually like they want to promote themselves as being this big bad dude or something.
Yeah, that tends to be like a look at me. I got my stuff together, and if I can only, and all these people are against me, it's like, okay, well, self-evident truth time. You're not in front of me because you got your stuff together.
Right. Either that or trying to act like they're the most gangster thing that ever hit the streets, and it's like, oh, we probably wouldn't be talking if that was them, but okay. So those are the only times where like the more normal things, but every once in a while you do run into those clients, and they are rare and far and few in between, that just like completely give you the runaround, or there to use your services, or there to do those sorts of things. And then those can sometimes overshadow the positive clients that come in. And it's something to really watch out for, to make sure you're not, because they're more stand out to you because they're an oddity. They're there, and it's like, I really didn't like that. So it's like trying to cap that.
And that, that's it. That often happens, just as an aside, that often happens to companies that utilize auxiliary services, or, services that like I give you a bus pass. Well, that's why they keep showing up at your door, after 31 days or even worse, after 30 days. I lost my bus pass. No, they probably sold it. Like so when you do the auxiliary services type thing, that's oftentimes when that pops up. But the other part of developing discrepancy that we have to talk about is that I want to talk about. I don't have to, but I want to talk about is making the individual create the argument for themselves to change. And this is the game changer. As a recovery coach, as a person who trains recovery coach, as a core trainer, the person who trains the trainers to train the recovery coaches, this is oftentimes when I see the biggest change in the quickest amount of time. It is when I get them to start arguing for themselves and arguing against me for themselves, making themselves believe like, no, I can change. I can do this. I need another chance. I need a shot at this. And one of the things that we've found as a great tool for this, not only the plan A, but like things like future authoring or self-authoring, the ability for an individual to start sitting down and really talking about their life experiences, talking about what they've went through, and then breaking it out and saying like, it is possible for me because I can make a plan, because I can do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's kind of that, like, it's kind of like we talked about in the first episode, I think we ever did, was that stake in the ground, right? So like figuring out, once they get their eyes set on that kind of stake in the ground, there's that longer term goal, that further out thing. And especially I've seen this, and it's really cool when someone starts like 3 or 4 sessions in and they're getting like, they're moving forward and progressing. And then all of a sudden that's when that kind of clicks in. It seems like they're like, man, I do got this. I mean, I'm creating these goals and I'm walking steps out and I'm completing goals that I have took forever to complete. And now I know it's possible, because I'm doing this thing. I think it's really, really great,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's jump to kind of the next one, which is avoiding argument.
You're
Hunter,
wrong.
how often, not how long, but how often are we in arguments with our recoveries?
0, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right about. That is the absolute worst worst way to spend your time in our field would be arguing with the recovery. I mean, we're probably going to lose, even though we won. We're probably still going to lose, but
yeah. Well, and what are we arguing about? Because It's their plan. This is about them. This is their recovery. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to come into work and I'm going to work with the next recovery. And that person's recovery is their recovery, because guess what? I'm going to go to sleep that night and I'm going to wake up the next day and I'll work with an next recovery. Like It's their plan. What they want to do is up to them. Now, ultimately, sometimes it's not always the case. That might be involved in court. Right. I mean, then it's the court's plan, unless it's still your plan, but it might not go the way that you thought it was going to go.
Right. And it's like what we talked about at the very beginning with what I talked about, I guess, on motivational interviewing, is like, it's much more powerful to have someone else decide they need to change instead of me telling them to change. And that's really where the arguments will usually, like, there's been times where it's not argument by any means, but I've told recoveries have told me that I'm wrong. And I'm like, well, actually, this is why I say that, but it's fine. And we kind of leave it at that, but there's times like that, but usually an argument is going to lie in when you tell a recovery the best pathway to what they want to get.
Yes, you're exactly right. It's going to, that argument only really ever develops when I stop listening and I start developing my own plan outside of the recovery's
consent. We need to treat them like an object.
Yes. What now? Explain an object. I think you just hit an interesting point, that this is another part of training. I don't want to go too much in depth with it, but what do you mean by object?
So an object is basically like, we refer to it as when we're talking to a recovery and we're telling them what to do. It's when we say, you need to do this because you're dealing with this, and this is what you're going through, and this is the solution. People aren't that simple. Recovery is not that simple. Nothing is that simple. So that's what we would consider treating an object, is when we decide we want to take control of that. We want to tell them exactly how to walk that out.
Yes. And what he's talking about is object, recipient, and resource. If you want to learn more about those, come to CCAR, come to a Recovery Coach Academy. It's a really interesting concept that we definitely suggest more people explore. So one thing with recovery is, especially about avoiding arguments, that tends to pop up more oftentimes than not, is when a recovery is referred to by the court or is referred to by an ultimatum from a loved one, and they come to you from pre-contemplation. What does that mean to you?
What, pre-contemplation?
What does pre-contemplation mean? And then what do you do when a recovery is there?
Well, if you guys want to know what pre-contemplation is, this is a perfect chance to check out podcast number 1.
Number one.
Yes, number one. But no, pre-contemplation is just not realizing there's an issue. And like Christian said, we see that when someone comes in, ultimatum from loved one, referred to by the court, whatever that might be. And it's basically that there's problems going on, but the problems are not related to the substance use disorder in that recovery's eyes. So the second part of the question was, where does the argument lie inside of that?
Well, what do you do with the individual that's coming to you with pre-contemplation and they're wanting to make they're wanting to argue with you? How do you avoid an argument with somebody that's coming to you like that?
Oh, you ask questions. I mean, that's probably my best way to do that. I've dealt with it quite a few times. I worked in the hospital. And it was basically kind of very pointed questions, but also open-ended questions that were going to a very specific point. Like when we're talking about all this stuff, like, man, my wife gave me an ultimatum and now I'm here and she says I can't be with the kids because, I passed out, from heroin when I was supposed to be watching the kids, something like that. And it's like, so tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how did that happen? Well, why were you using? What made you want to use when you were watching the kids? How often are you using? And the more that we bring to a self-realization, like when the answer is like, well, I use pretty much every day. Who doesn't? Why did I use? Because I felt an urge or I was going to get dope sick. And it's like, well, that's a problem. It's like we kind of bring it around to a self-realization point. And that really does, for me, it avoids the argument, because if I'm telling someone they have a problem, they probably don't want to hear it. They've heard it a million times. Kind of like anything else we were talking about, telling them how to recover, anything else. I want them to realize themselves, like, okay, I do have a problem and something needs to be done about this. Or my favorite question is, do you think that the problems you're experiencing right now might be due to the substance use?
Yeah, man. And that's the thick one. That I think that's like this fastball right down the lane. Like it hits him hard. And there's a lot of different ways that you can approach avoiding an argument with the recovery. We will always suggest kind of putting the onus of responsibility back on the recovery of, what do you want to do? Can you do this? Do you think you're possible of changing? Do you think this is even possible for you? Mm-hmm. And well, at the same time, following it up with the encouragement of like, I think it's possible for you. I definitely think you can do this. I think that you're more than capable. I think you're more capable than you think you are. But the question is, do you? And that's the best way, at least in my opinion, to avoid arguments sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. And then, there will be times too where we say that and we hear, no, I don't have a problem. No. And it's like, all right, then this is kind of where we part ways, so that also avoids the argument. We're not going to argue and say you do have an issue. It's just like, all right, I understand that. If this becomes a problem, get back to me,
All right. So let's talk about that next one, which is supporting self-efficacy. This is by and large the one place that we see recovery coaches fail
100%.
Time and time again. Now, I'm wondering if we can break this a little bit more towards our personal experiences with this, mm-hmm. and then break it back into kind of the science of it. So what is your personal experience with struggling with self-efficacy?
So are you talking about me personally in recovery or me as a recovery coach?
As a recovery coach supporting self-efficacy.
So I've noticed I struggled with this in my early recovery coaching days. And that was basically, I sat down and I wanted to get it done. Like at first meeting, it's like doctor called, therapist called, dentist called, eye doctor appointment set up, intake paperwork done. You know what I'm saying? And like the best way to do that is just to do it. Mm-hmm. And get it done. Oh, we're going to fill out Medicaid application. Like, let's get it done. It's like, whatever it takes, I want to like push the process. That was my problem in early recovery. I was kind of just wanting to get that person on the right track.
Barely. And they didn't have any buy-in from them.
Exactly.
Basically, it's like, you do this for me. And then what was the result of that?
So I had it pop up one time in particular where I was getting phone calls like almost every day. And I was actually teaching Recovery Coach Academy. So I was busy. I was out of the office that week for a clientele. Cause like during Recovery Coach Academy, they're 30 hours.
You're zeroed in. Yeah. You don't have time for a lot of other stuff. We have other support staff that can handle it, but man, when your academy is on, that's it. There's nothing else.
So I basically, I ended up having a conversation with this recovery, and it came down to, I need you to call this and figure out this number for me. And I was like, I can give you the number, but it's not my job to call them for you. That's not good for either of us. And it came down to, well, that's your job. And I was like, actually, it was like, and I kind of had to break it down and realize I had to tell them like, that's not my job. And that's very harmful for us because that could foster codependent relationship. And I'm not always going to be a recovery coach. So the bottom line is, it's kind of, when we're talking about supporting it and we're talking about struggles with it, it's usually inflicted by the recovery coach not having boundaries set up or not processing something in the right way, the way it should be done. Because really, like, now the way I handle things is I will find the numbers for those resources, then I give them to the recovery, and either they will call them during the meeting or they will call them before our next meeting.
And we'll advocate, you know, we'll be on the other, if there's a question that they're not quite sure how to answer, we'll jump in a heartbeat, but
100%.
you need buy-in, dude.
Yep.
It's like number one. And we see too many recoveries and recovery coaches get into this way of thinking of, just like you said, it's easier if I do it for you. It's easier if I do it for you. And then they call us, they call you, they call me, they definitely call me 3-6 months on, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not sure how to do this, yada, yada, yada. Or their agency sends them to ethics so that they can learn better barriers or whatever. And it does come down to, you need to be promoting self-efficacy from the get. I mean, the very first meeting you have with a recovery, we're promoting self-efficacy, because I'm going to tell you right now, from that very first meeting, from that very first moment, if they think they're coming in to just utilize another resource and a service, you're just another service. And, you know, the parade of case managers and therapists and doctors and this, that, you're just another person on the pile that basically, after I get what I want from you, you're going to fail. Versus you sit them down and be like, this is what I want for you. I want you to be able to achieve everything that you've ever wanted and more. And I'm going to help you with that. But that's the key word, help. Help implies that I will come along the way with you. I might clear the road a little bit for you, but you're going to have to take the steps that it needs to be so that you can get there.
Right. And that's constantly pushing it back. And I mean, I feel like it's really important to realize the two factor of that is like it, and you kind of hit on it. It's not good for the recovery coach. Like, you will burn out if you start to
promise that.
Yeah. Allow codependent relationship with your clients. One, it's not good for you. Number two, your client will fail if you do that to them. I mean, I'm not saying it's a guaranteed thing, but like, probably going to happen. Because what you're doing when you're setting up like a non-self-efficacy relationship, when you're allowing the client to become codependent, is you are robbing them from the benefit of learning how to do these things on their own. Because the goal is, like, recovery coaches really do not work with people for long periods of time. Like, I mean, when I say long, I mean, we're not working with someone for 5-10 years, you know. That person, we're hoping their life expectancy is going to be more than 5 or 10 years, you know, sometimes not, who knows. But when we're sitting down with them, basically we're going to spend, for me, usually it's like a couple months sitting down and pushing them into not pushing them is a bad word, but allowing them to walk into a spot where they can manage life on life's terms, where they can do things that they need to do. They know how to fill out applications. They know how to build a resume. They know how to apply for, call a doctor for a screening and stuff like that. Like, they know how to do those things, because after 2 months, who are they going to call? So
yeah, and the quicker we do the quicker we get self-efficacy going, the better it is longer. The better it is further down the road. It is going to, the individuals start using their resources. The best calls that we get as recovery coaches is when somebody calls us and say, hey, can we not work on these 3 things today? I've already got those done. I need to work on the next 3 things. It's like, great. You're exercising, you know, you're utilizing me for what I'm supposed to be utilized for, which is, let's start the engine. You're the one that has to keep it going. Right?
Absolutely. So they're formulating their own goals and completing their own goals. It's amazing.
All right. So of course we will go with the next one, which is rolling with resistance. This happens all the time. Oftentimes, like,
no, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. Resistance of people. Don't make me name names. So resistance oftentimes develops in recoveries when you are moving too fast, when you're moving in a direction that they do not like, when there is a lack of clarity, when there's uncertainty, when there has been traditionally they have failed in the spot that you're pushing them towards. Resistance can pop up at any given time for any given reason. So there's a lot of really important things that you need to do with resistance. First and foremost, you need to develop an understanding of where the resistance is coming from. And that's oftentimes where I see the recovery coaches fail. They just see resistance and they imply intention. They imply like, well, you're resisting this because of this, or you're resisting this because, you know, you just don't want to agree with me, or you're resisting this because you just don't want to do that again, or you don't want to go to treatment because, you know, the recovery coach immediately starts listening to their internal voice instead of the external voice in front of them. So when somebody is resisting you, you need to identify, okay, where's the resistance stranding from? Why don't they want to go to treatment? I've been to treatment 35 times. It doesn't work for me. Or why don't they want to go to apply for a job? Every time I apply for a job, they look at my criminal background and they just say no. So I've kind of given up hope. When you can identify that, you can start to identify goals that maybe even the recovery was unaware of, that they can work on, micro level goals that they can work on personally that will slowly get them past that hump so you can start working on other things.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hit it right on the head. I don't know what else I could add for that, except for the no thing I was doing was trying to be resistant, in case you guys didn't get that. So no, they don't. But anyway, so yeah, when we're rolling with that resistance, it's like, we identify where the resistance is coming from, like you said, and then we take a different approach. We reformulate goals with them. And I've noticed this is like, sometimes it is that the recovery really does want to work on something, but they're extremely, extremely scared to work on it. Like there's a big change of some sort. It happens more on the big goals I've noticed. But it's a bigger change than what they're ready to take on right now. But they don't want to say that because they still want it to happen, but they're still scared of it. So it's like, when we realize that, maybe it's a time to back off the gas just a little bit on them. Like say, how about, school's one, for instance, like
school's a big one.
Yeah. So like, how about instead of worrying about this right now, if it's something you're like wanting to pursue, but it's a little bit, it's a lot right now. How about we just go in and maybe just apply for the local community college or whatever. How about we just throw an application in? Like, let's just do that. Let's set that as a goal, not necessarily going back to school, but just seeing if we get accepted, one step at a time. We break it down, we make it smaller, make it a little bit easier. And I mean, it just helps a lot to not be able to like look at that daunting goal with the resistance. Like that's a big hill. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at one step up that hill, that's not quite as bad.
Not bad at all. And I think with resistance, oftentimes resistance, I don't want to say all the time, it is oftentimes resistance is directly the result of fear. Mm-hmm. It is the result of, I've tried this too many times, it doesn't work. It is a result of, I don't think that that's going to work for me. I don't think that I can do that. Or there's other unforeseeable things that maybe they haven't shared with you. Now, that's not to say resistance is always stranded from fear. Right. Resistance sometimes is just stranded from, I don't want to do it. Why? Because I see it as a waste of time. That's not fear. That's just like, I don't want to participate in that because I don't see it. Resistance, at least for the recovery coach, always 150% of the time strands from, you're not listening close enough. Mm-hmm. You're not listening to what the recovery is saying. You're not taking in, there's portions of information that you don't know, or that you're not hearing, or that you're not consuming, that is causing them to be resistant to what you're saying. So it's important for a recovery coach, when you're facing resistance, understand that resistance is based out of lack of information on your side. It's never based out of lack of information on their side. It's based out of, you are missing something, not them.
Yeah. And I mean, as our job as peer recovery coaches too, is like to provide alternate options for that person. So like when we're talking about like resistance to treatment, especially, okay, treatment doesn't work for you. So what do we want to do? Like, and then they'll be like, well, I don't know what else there is. And it's like, well, there's support meetings, there's IOP, there's medically assisted treatment. There's a lot of options. There's a detox where you can just detox safely instead of going back to residential. Like knowing those things, having some actual resources is probably your best weapons against resistance. Like one, obviously making smaller goals. Two is like, if the problem's that pathway itself, figure out a different path. You know what I'm saying? It's not your recovery to walk out. Like have a slew of things. You didn't go through medically assisted treatment. That's fine. The recovery can, So I'd say that's another one I run into a lot. I ran into that a lot at the hospital, especially because our main resource was inpatient treatment, because it fit the clientele that we were mostly working with.
Sure.
But there were times where inpatient was not a good option. There was times when inpatient was not something that they were ready to commit to. And the worst thing I can do is push somebody into something they're not ready to do. So it's like, okay, like how about we just set you up with some therapy numbers for therapists? How about just some IOP? How about the local methadone clinic? How about here's some needle exchanges? Anything that might work for that person, or here's a way to get some Narcan, something that will help them that they're not resistant to,
Well, and I think you just identified it, because oftentimes, just because they're not resistant right now does not mean they will be resistant about it later on. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is resistant to treatment, we will try to work in the avenue that they've designated, barring that it's not illegal and barring that it's outside of the realm of possibility.
Or if it's only like slightly illegal.
Yeah, right.
No.
We will do the best of our ability to facilitate the multiple pathway or the pathway that they have chosen for themselves. But oftentimes we have found in that facilitation, one of two things happens. Either first, they find recovery, which is amazing. They chose their pathway. They stayed and maintained the pathway. They find their, recovery leading to long-term recovery, which is that's the goal. We've completed the goal. Like, congratulations, fantastic. Pats on the back for all. Or they end up kind of lapsing and they're looking at it saying like, well, maybe I do need to try treatment, or well, maybe I do need to try, my thinking has gotten me here and I keep on going back to the same old place. So I'm open to suggestion.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of ultimately what our job probably ends up coming to, like 70% of the time. I mean, this is something we talk about in Recovery Coach Academy a lot, is like the instance of the person who wants to stop heroin by cutting back themselves and be their own accountability. And then it doesn't work. And the next week it's like, okay, let's try it again. It doesn't work, and it's like, how about we have a conversation about this? How about we have a conversation about going into treatment? And it's like, well, no, I'm going to try it again. And then eventually it comes to the point to where it's like, there's an awareness that comes about, like, maybe this isn't working. Maybe that I don't have the power to do this. And then that also kind of ties.
We call that the Jedi mind trick, by the way.
These are not the droids you were looking for.
Exactly. Is the ability to you set the parameters early on, which is your way. I like it. I think we should go with it. But here's an agreement. If your way does not work, we discuss a different way. Mm-hmm. And then you keep on revisiting that. And we promise you eventually they'll just say, we've had this conversation so many times now, like, clearly my way is not working. Let's try a different way.
Right. Or we identify discrepancies. I mean, we kind of come back into that. So we might say like, hey, listen, man, I know you're saying that this is what you're going to do to quit, but this hasn't been working. It's been like 4 weeks. It's like, do you think it's time we have a conversation about this? So it's kind of the other part of a motivational interviewing, right? So they're saying this, it's clearly not working. The actions are not matching the words. So there's a point where we might bring that up as well. So
absolutely. So we have a little bit of time left. We got to talk about a couple of like the key designations for what to do in motivational interviewing. So obviously open-ended questions is always going to be the top of the list. What's the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question?
Christian, do you like that water you're drinking?
Well, it's subpar.
Christian, how's that water?
Well, it's pretty good. It's, okay. I like, it's wet.
What do you think about that water?
I like the blue. I like it's appealing, this water. I've been really thirsty today. Actually, I've drinking a lot of coffee. My lips are super dry. So
yeah. So essentially, I mean, that was a really stupid example, obviously, but it's instead of asking like, do you want to go to treatment? We would ask, how do you feel about the idea of treatment? It's just simply opening it up to take it away from a yes or no. It opens it up to get a little bit more dialogue in there. Like, well, I've thought about it, but this and that. And then we get a bigger picture, we get a better story, and we understand what's actually going on. And then we make the recovery talk a little bit. And it gives them a chance to be heard. And I really want to resist saying make them feel like they're being heard, because like the whole point of motivational interviewing is making sure the recovery is heard. We don't want to make them feel that way, but actually let them do that.
Yes. Yeah. There's a large difference between, the actual application of they actually feel that way versus like, hey, yeah, it's nice that they think that they're feeling like they're being heard, but really I'm going to do what I'm going to do as a recovery coach. That doesn't work for anybody.
Right. Terrible idea.
So the next one obviously is affirmation. Affirmation is always kind of, it is like ticking the dial forward. Like, yes, we want to keep on moving. You're doing a great job. Keep it going. You're, banging up job. Mm-hmm. I've had people that pursue their degrees in affirmation at a time. So they go, I'm not sure if I should, I'm thinking about going back to school. I'm not sure what I should do. Dude, you should totally go back to school if that's what you're thinking. If if that's what's put on your heart right now, dude, totally go do it. They're like, okay, well, I'm not sure. Should I go apply? Like, yes, of course. At least the best you can do, like you said earlier. Right. Apply. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They go apply. Man, I got in. Should I? And it's just affirmation after it. Right. Yes. You're doing the right thing. You shouldn't have to hesitate and wonder like, should I take the next step? Like, no, go. You're doing the right thing for the first time possibly in your life. You're doing the right thing. be excited about it.
Right. Absolutely. It's just, constantly confirming that they are capable and able to do those things. And then the next thing we have is that active listening piece, right? So we call it kind of repeating back, I guess is kind of what I refer to it as. And that's essentially, I do this to Christian, actually irritate him sometimes because he knows what I'm doing when I do it. But like, so what I'm hearing you say is this.
And I'll throw something at him.
Yeah, I know. It's like I do it when he's frustrated. I'm like, so I'm hearing you say you're frustrated because I stole the stapler off your desk. But anyway, so it's basically just summarizing, and not summarizing, but repeating back. So we make sure that they know we're actually here. Like, I know what you're saying and I'm actually paying attention. I'm not just blankly staring into the abyss. And then the other part is also correcting those miscommunications on a smaller note. Obviously, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but we're going to have that on a larger note on the conversation. But on a smaller note, just be like, oh, so what you're saying is this, or what you need is this, or okay, or even just saying okay sometimes. That's another form of active listening. Just like, I'm acknowledging that you are talking and that I am actually paying attention to this.
Yes. And then we have summary, and summary it's our powerful tool. Like I said, it's good to have a couple of like micro summaries in the midst of it of like, okay, let's stop. Just want to catch up. Okay. This is where I'm hearing in the discussion right now. Is this what you're trying to indicate to me right now? Just to make sure that you're both on that same wavelength, but ultimately you want to go it all the way back. I do this all the time at the very end, after we've set out our goals, after we've done everything, then I summarize the entire visit of like, all right, Hunter, we started today. We wanted to work on you getting your driver's license back. We wanted you to work on you going to apply for school, and then you getting your doctor's appointments. So for your goals this week, right? We are going to, you're going to call the Secretary of State and figure out when you can make an appointment because of COVID. We are going to research the phone number and email that you will need so that you can apply for school. And then, the next thing. And by summarizing everything in those goals, it's like, okay, we've got our marching orders. I'll see you next week at Monday at same bat time, same bat channel. And then this is, we go back and like, okay, so last week, these were our goals. Let's revisit them. This week, how do they go? Let's talk about them. Okay, let's set some new goals.
Right. Absolutely. So I think that pretty much sums up, what we can tell you about motivational interviewing. Like Christian said, this is a topic where there's going to be no end to it. I know on like my CEU account, I found I think a 30-part series on motivational interviewing on there. So it's just important to realize that what we're talking about, this is scratching the very, very tip of the surface. So we call it the iceberg effect. So it means like we're touching the very top and there's like a huge iceberg underneath the water that we're not even talking about. So if this is something that interests you, if this is something you're like, man, I kind of want to learn more about this, I feel like this would be very applicable to me in my career field or just my life in general. This helps me in my day-to-day life. Go and research it.
Yes, go and research it. And one of the best books that I can suggest on motivational interviewing, it is phenomenal. I cannot describe it enough, which there's a couple of them. First is going to be Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. It's by Chris Voss. You can find that on Audible. He's, ex-agent guy, worked at FBI. He's actually the lead negotiator for the FBI's kidnapping. And it is amazing some of the things that he imparts just by asking things like, well, how are we supposed to do that? How are we supposed to? Definitely worth a listen, definitely worth a read if you like the paperback. So go and check that out. The next one is Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. I had you read that. What do you think?
I will say the whole point of that book is to tell us how terrible we are at motivational interviewing. I read, when I was reading, I figured it was going to tell me how at the end to read people, but it's basically as humans, we're really bad at reading people and really good at preconceived notions. Mm-hmm. So it's be aware of that. The end,
Well, but ultimately though, that's invaluable knowledge, right? Is really when you go into those motivational interviewing moments and you think that you're good at this, it's reality, you're not as good as you think you are. Right. And it's important that you have a level of humility when you're approaching that. So go check those books out. Both of them are you can find them on Audible. So if you like to listen, you can go and buy them. They're New York Times bestsellers, I believe, both of them, but they're so worth it. They're so worth listening to. And you can find podcast interviews with those guys. They're doing a lot, Joe Rogan, Dr. Jordan Peterson. They've done a lot of interviews with those people that have written those books. But with that being said, next one, as we do, meditations are for the recoveries. So that's going to be this upcoming Wednesday. And then next Friday, I'm not sure who we're interviewing next Friday.
I guess we'll figure it out on Friday.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up having to figure it out on Friday. I want to say it's James Saylor. I could be wrong, but I think it is James Saylor. If it's not James Saylor, it's Bob Powell, or Dr. Bob Powell. I'm sorry. But the big thing is our next couple of Mondays, we are going to be doing ACEs training. We got one Monday after this that we're going to be doing just kind of a small blurb for Addiction Science Monday. And then when we come back, so 2 Mondays from now, we start a 3-part series on adverse childhood experiences training. It is going to be worth it. People, listen to it, send it to your colleagues, send it to, if you're ever going to send them a podcast episode about anything, it's going to be about those ACEs training. Dr. Bob Powell is one of the lead trauma therapists inside of the state of Michigan, then, blowing out to the United States. The guy, he's a CEO of major nonprofit in Jackson, Michigan. The guy is a juggernaut, and he is going to be phenomenal. So please tune in for that. With that being said, have a good one.